attentive. Thank you so much. You're great. Do you guys read books? Excellent. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and it is my very absolute pleasure. I'm very excited to welcome tonight Kelly Link as we celebrate her debut novel. Can you believe it? Debut novel, The Book of Love. Yay! I'm assuming we have a lot of already diehard Link fans in the audience. So when you hear my shock at saying debut novel, I think you understand why, because she's a very talented and prolific writer. We haven't seen this form before. Kelly is joined tonight by San Francisco's very own Kate Folk. Let's give a hand for Kate as well. Thank you all for joining us. This is very special, and I'm really glad to have you all here. Brief business. Thank you for joining us both in person here now and also online. Hello, online audience. We appreciate you wherever you are tuning in from. We are broadcasting from San Francisco, California. We are on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we hope that you join us in our pledge to turn land acknowledgement into action. What is acknowledgement without action? By donating either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. I hate to be packed, but we do have a QR code at the back, and I promise it is useful because it will send you directly to the Ramaytush Ohlone Land Trust website, where you can learn a lot more about how to participate in this project of rematriation. Other brief business. Now is a good time to silence your phones. If you have not already, I would encourage you to do so, just so it doesn't go off in the middle and then you're that guy, right? Please do check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are at right now. And I think you might enjoy it if you are, again, a reader, as I suspect many of you are. The restroom is behind me. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. It is available to attendees of our event during event time. And if you have any questions about how to get there, I will gladly answer them. Thank you. We have books by both of our authors available at the front register. You can find them there. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you also support the authors who put so much work into making these books. And then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two writers who are joining us tonight. Kate Folk has written for publications including The New Yorker, New York Times, Granta, Ziziva, and many others. She's received support from the Headland Center for the Arts, yay, MacDowell Vermont Studio Center, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. Recently, she was a Wallace Stegner Fellow in Fiction at Stanford, also yay, local Stanford. She lives here in California, and she is the author of Out There. Please give another hand for Kate Folk. Okay, thank you, Kate. And last but most certainly not least, Kelly Link is the author of Get in Trouble, a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction, Magic for Beginners, Stranger Things Happen, and Pretty Monsters. Her novel, The Book of Love, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand for Kelly Link.
Hi. I'm going to maybe put this here. Hello. I'm going to make a lot of noise with the mic. I've been on so many planes that I'm a little dubious about my ability to sit on a stool, but we'll see.
So good to be here with you tonight.
Thank you for doing this.
Of course, yeah. And I feel like this book has been my companion for the last several weeks. And I went on like a little trip and I took it with me. And I just feel like I really know these characters in this world. And I love having like a big book like this to really become immersed in that way. And I feel like this novel does such a great job of that. So thank you for writing
it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to read just very briefly from the beginning. Can y'all hear me okay? All right. Thank you. So, this is from the first section, the book of Susanna. A girl wakes up in her sister's bed. Laura, she says. No one answers. Oh, she shouldn't be here. The one who should be here isn't. The girl's name is Susanna. She is too tall, lamentably tall, and she has bad dreams. Shouldn't her dreams be comforting, restorative? Shouldn't she see the ones she longs with all her heart to see, but in dreams, too, they are inexplicably missing? The sheets are half off the bed as if someone has been yanking them. It isn't morning yet. It's the middle of the night. Everything is in the wrong place, except it isn't. Her mother, Ruth, isn't home yet. All those NICU babies with their complicated medical needs, their rashy bottoms and feeding tubes, suffused in ultraviolet light, parents slumped in blistered Naugahyde recliners, nurses murmuring in corners about the bid to unionize, about husbands and television shows and their own children. Do they fall silent when Susanna's mother comes close? I'm tired of this, the girl says to the moon in the window because no one else is there to talk to. Not knowing, being in the dark, being alone in the dark. Don't you ever get tired of it? The moon is full. Isn't this proof of something, that things can disappear and then come back again? 11 months since whatever happened, and Susanna knows Laura isn't coming back. If she did come back, she'd say, "What the hell are you doing in my bed, Susanna? Oh my God." Susanna can almost hear her say it. She gets up and makes the bed Laura would, because Laura isn't here to do the things that Laura ought to do, to keep Susanna from doing the things Susanna shouldn't do. All of Laura's stuffed animals are on the floor, the sky blue owl and the pangolin in its gingham dress. Everyone loved Laura best. Everyone misses Laura. The threadbare dog with the sewn-up place where the button eye should be has a secret name. Laura would never tell Susanna what she called it. Its name was probably something stupid, though. No one ever keeps a good secret. And now no one knows except for the dog. Susanna picks up Laura's things and puts them down again. Laura isn't here to tell her not to. So she conjures Laura up in her head. Don't worry, Laura, it's easy to put little things back where they belong. The little circles and marks and the dust on the shelves show where each right place is. If Susanna puts each of Laura's things back exactly where it ought to be, then everything will go back to the way it should be. The china shepherdess that was their grandmother's. Susanna has a silver ring, missing all but one of its seed pearls. Pictures of Laura and Susanna and their mother, pictures of Laura and Susanna and Daniel on stage. Laura's romance novels, alphabetically arranged. Her favorite writer was Caitlin Hightower. The covers of the romance novels meant to indicate that the attractive people on them will eventually have sex, fall inextricably in love, which in these books neither lessens nor changes, but instead hardens, trapping those who inhabit it as amber preserves the insect. Wistful music, symphonic music, Laura's theme, Celine Dion, that kind of thing, will begin to swell appropriately while these attractive and imaginary people fuck, perhaps on a horse, behind a tapestry, on a boat, on a hill, in the past. Hail fellow, kismet, everything in the right place. Very knock-knock joke. Knock-knock, who's there? Does it matter? You're a person with a pirate ship, a dreadful secret, a good fortune, and I'm a person with a fortress, a walled garden, a stone for a heart, so let's have sex. Let's fall in love. Sure, why not? There are so many novels about falling in love and so few about finding a really good and rewarding job. Not that Susanna has read a book in a long time. Books are for kids who go to college. Her mother keeps leaving community college brochures on the kitchen counter. Susanna keeps throwing them away. Little lines of dust where the spines meet the shelf. Thank you.
Thank you for reading that. And I feel like there's such a great introduction to so many of the book's themes just contained in those first 2 pages. And I feel like should I summarize the book a little bit, like to my best ability?
I would love that.
I mean, so basically, it's the book centers on mostly on these three teenagers who have died. They don't know how, and then they have been in some mysterious limbo for like a year, and then they come back to the living world, right? But there's all these supernatural entities that want something from them in various ways, and they have to kind of solve these mysteries and maybe harness the power of this magic that they have, or that everyone has, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
And there's many other characters, and it's this like polyphonic narration with many different points of view character, and the chapters are very short for the most part, and each chapter is the book of someone, like the book of Susanna, Laura, etc. So yeah, is that a good?
It is. You know, if people ask me what the book is about, my mind goes blank. So it's really great to hear somebody else summarize and think that sounds right.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that like thinking about genre is really interesting too, because in a way it's like a ghost story. I mean, it deals with dark themes, right? Obviously about death and then like coming back to life, but it also centers on teenage characters, and it has such a kind of buoyant, joyful quality to it throughout too. Like these characters are just so full of life and appetites, and are really endearing characters. And even if they've just kind of come back from this, you know, horrifying limbo, they're mostly concerned with like their relationships with each other and their crushes and
with
so
laundry.
on. So
Yeah.
So I just wondered, and then also there's the part about romance novels, which feels like it's kind of like a love letter to romance novels in a way too. Like there is a romance novelist character in the book. So I guess I just wondered, like, how were you thinking about genre as you wrote this, if you were at all, or kind of what traditions were you writing into with this book?
I definitely thought of it as a coming of age novel. That when I was thinking about this book, I thought a lot about where I could situate the characters in terms of their lives, and it just did not work the same way when I made them older. You know, adolescence is a liminal space, one in which I think that feels adjacent or tangled up with the supernatural, or at least I think adolescence allows for the possibility of very large changes and kind of transformation in a way that felt right. But it also is my love letter to the romance genre, you know, a genre that at different points in my life has been an anchor or sort of a source of enormous pleasure, in the same way that horror is. And in fact, that those, you know, the poles of those two genres are where I guess I wanted to locate this book. And there is a romance novelist in this book, and one of my rules for myself was that that I wanted to have a lot of different kinds of love in the book, but also that I wanted to, if the endings were not happy, that they at least would allow for the possibility of happiness, because I felt that this writer, whose name is Marion Gorge, but writes as Caitlin Hightower, that in some ways I organized this around her idea of the way that she would most like stories to go.
Yeah, I think there's some line maybe towards the end of the book, which is about like in these like romance stories, it's like there need to be enough kind of ups and downs to keep us interested, but we kind of know where we're going in the end, and there's something really comforting about that. Maybe about writing in genre in general, because there's these tropes that we're expecting.
Yeah, I have been rereading a novel by Nicola Griffith, Hill, because I had read Meanwood, and it's been long enough that I went back to the novel that preceded it, and I was thinking about the fact that Hill is a book with this gorgeous, very happy ending where somebody finds their place in the world, and you know if the same characters show up in a very big book that is a sequel, that at some point they're going to be much less happy than they were at the end of that book. And And so you sort of begin the sequel with a heavy heart, and you think, well, what terrible things will happen to this character in this book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was really curious to know how you went about like structuring the novel, like if you did outlining and that kind of thing. Because I mean, I feel like many people here, probably I've read your short stories for many years and like really looked up to you as a short story writer and loved your stories. And so now, you know, I just imagine that writing a novel after writing stories for so long maybe uses different muscles, or how is the experience of that different?
I think it took much longer. It took so long that I wrote a whole collection secretly while I was working on this, and then presented it to my editor. At the same time, I gave her this so that she would not feel that it was a delaying action, but rather she was being given 2 books. I still felt guilty about it. But I wrote the stories that I wrote for the collection in part because I think I am, even if I write more novels, which I think I will, I think I am a short story writer, but I think I'm a maximalist. I think I was a maximalist when I wrote short stories, and when I was thinking about what I wanted to do in a novel, all of the things that I couldn't do in short stories, I thought, well, at last I can do these things. They were all things that required length. You know, they required a lot of words. I don't know that I thought that it would be quite this long, but one of the things that I really wanted to do that does not work the same way in short fiction was I wanted lots of points of view. And I wanted those points of view when the reader is in them or when I was in them writing them to feel as if that person was the main character, at least of their story, even if somebody only got 1 chapter. And I'm a preacher's kid, so I think that formulation of the book of somebody, and I knew that one of the characters was going to be Ruth, and the book of Ruth had a nice biblical ring to it, you know. I knew that would be one part of the structure, and then setting, I think, was the other thing that ended up organizing the structure a lot. That it was going to all take place in a fairly confined space and in a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. And I wrote the end first, which I either do or else at least I have an ending in my head when I write short stories. And so that was the thing that was the same with stories and with this novel, is that the ending for me was the thing that I began with, and then the process of figuring out the characters and beginning to move them towards that ending was the... And I did not outline, but I think maybe the closest thing to outlining that I had a map in my head of some of the things that I would move the characters through, but every time that I moved on to a new section, I would think, all right, so this section from this other character's point of view has to feel as interesting or as lively as the chapter that we're moving out of. And that was kind of a good rubric to think, well, what are the things that can happen in this space? Whereas, is there something that emotionally feels as interesting as where we were previously? And that was sort of the way that I kept going. And if the section that I was working on didn't feel as alive as the previous section, then I would just keep on working until it did.
That's really interesting. So you started with the setting of the town before even knowing any of the characters?
No, I think it was ending characters and then thinking about, I knew that these characters were going to be very tied up in place, and that they were not kids who had been a lot of other places.
Yeah.
And I think that was because they were coming back from the dead, and so I wanted there to be a real, if they did not love the town, then at least they had very strong feelings about it, and about their lives in that place.
Yeah, they're coming back from the dead, but everyone thinks that they've been in Ireland. So.
I have a good friend, young adult writer, Sarah Reese Brennan, who is Irish, and I think I set their cover story in Ireland in part to amuse her. She gave me a necklace which I wore every day while I worked on this. And it's the moon on the front, and on the back it says the fucking moon. And so I did have a ritual. If I was going to be working on the book, I would go put the necklace on, and then I would sit, and at least I felt like I had a piece of jewelry on, even if I had to write.
Yeah. Yeah, so among all those characters, which was kind of like the easiest to write or the most fun to write? Because there's some, human characters, there's some maybe not so human characters. So.
Susanna was my entry point because she's angry, which is always pleasurable to write. I'm often angry that I have to write, period. So it's easy to move into that space. She has not died, but when everybody comes back, she no longer remembers that they were missing, but she knows that something is up. And I felt very much in her position as the writer, that I was mad and I had to figure out what the characters were doing and what they were up to. So she was very easy to identify with. But honestly, I liked all of them. If I didn't, then I kept on working until I did. But the parts that were the most pleasurable to write were the books. The books are the chapters that were just one and done, where I got to move into somebody's point of view who lived in this town, create them, and then that was the only sort of point of view you were going to get from them.
Yeah, and the town is so interesting, and I wondered if that was based on a real place.
The town is in some ways somewhat close to all of the towns in Western Mass where I've now been living for 20 years. They are fairly small. There's a sort of waves of people who pass through, either college students or tourists, and a lot of kind of quirky people, quirky stores, some good restaurants. The thing that's different is my husband grew up in Scotland. I grew up in Miami, and we are not near the ocean, and it's mystifying to both of us how we are not near the ocean now. And so I really wanted to put a book beside a coast. So that part was wish fulfillment. And it's not, I will be honest, it's not the landscape is not particularly Massachusettsian. It's much more West Coast.
Yeah.
But I kind of a West Coast vista in my head.
Yeah, it seemed like it could have been like in Marin or something.
Yeah.
A quirky little town.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like the town and kind of the time feel very rooted in like reality, because I think it's set in like around like 2010s, like 2014 or
2016, something like that.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot of music in the book too, and I feel like I really liked that kind of the reference points to our world and like cultural references then mixed in among like the more magical or supernatural elements. So do you ever find that that's like kind of a balancing act? Because I feel like too many references could potentially make it feel like limited in some way, but
this is a conversation that I have when I teach a lot. You may have it as well, which is the question of, are you dating something, depending on how you integrate things that are very contemporary to a specific moment. And I think I read backwards enough that often a novel that I read feels like a historical document because the world has changed such a great deal. And so I think what I have decided on the whole is those kind of details to me as a reader feel satisfying. That the world may sort of move and change, but in the same way that I am satisfied by science fiction or fantasy, having the kind of texture of difference from the moment in which I exist. That even stories or novels, even, and I do think there's an awkward period, about 5 years maybe after a book, the setting, we've moved past it. Suddenly, I think things begin to feel a little wobbly, or a little, not embarrassing, but just a little strange, and not in a good way. And then it sort of becomes again more comfortable, because you're so far away from it then. So yeah, I thought about it I did think about it, but the period in which I started the book, I decided that felt most true to the mood that I began it in, and so I was going to preserve that mood as I wrote the book.
Yeah, and it's just like a hard thing too with publishing books, because the process is so long, so it's kind of always going to be historical fiction, even if you're writing about right now. By the time it comes out, it could take 10 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really enjoyed that too. And it's true, it's like once it gets past that like uncanny valley of being a little too recent but still in the past, then it's just like a document of that time, and then it's satisfying. So the music aspect, like, is music an important part of your life, or have you played music yourself, or just listen?
I took piano for 8 or 9 years when I was a kid and hated it. Never really learned to read music, but I could pick up by watching my teacher and play stuff and then sort of forget it again. But I do love music. We listen to a lot of music, and I think also that what I love about music and books potentially is, I think people have different feelings. People often say, "Well, I'm not a writer. I'm not a storyteller," even though they are. But I think for some reason, writing or storytelling feels sealed off, maybe from everyday experience. But almost everybody, and not everybody reads, but everybody has a relationship with music. Music surrounds us. People, even if they're not professional musicians, they still sing, and they feel like they should sing. And that the way in which rhythm or sort of repetitive sound patterns are a part of our lives. To me, it feels very satisfying to include that in fiction. And I was reading that somebody said that when singers go on vocal rest, that they cannot even listen to music, because when we listen to music, our vocal cords move as if we are singing, even though we're not. And I really like that, because I feel like then, in the same way that if you put a fairy tale or use fairy tale language in a book, that when you put music into books, that it draws up other kinds of pattern making in people's heads. And so I like the idea that somebody, if there's a song reference, sort of hits a node in your brain, and suddenly you are maybe not just hearing it, but maybe your vocal cords, without you realizing it, are sort of evoking that song as well.
And do you listen to music while you write?
Yeah, I like noise. I don't like to be alone with myself when I write. I often write with other writers. I like to write in cafes. I like to write in people's living rooms. And if it's often in those dining rooms or living rooms, I have on my headphones. I'm listening to music. I had a couple of playlists that I would use when I would come back to this. I would listen to those playlists in order to put myself back into the mental space where I had been when I had last been working. And there are, I think up on my website, there's a link to a Spotify playlist and an Apple Music playlist with a lot of that music on it.
What's it called?
Well, the playlist is just called The Book of Love.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay,
it was called Working for a long time. And then it was called Still Working. And then I think it was called And Still Working.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like I'm the exact opposite. Like I just want to be in like a box without any sensation coming
Right?
from anywhere when I'm writing, and like no one perceive me. But yeah, I like that. I like the idea of, you know, kind of feeding off of other people's energy too. Maybe writing alongside other writers.
It's pretty great. I know it's not for everybody, but I don't like writing so much, but if I'm with other people, I'm reminded that other people also don't like writing, and yet they keep on doing it. And I think, well, I guess I should probably keep on doing it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just wanted to go back to the book a bit and talk about magic in the book. And I mean, I just feel like the system is so, the way the magic works in the book is so interesting, and how like there's one character who kind of rejects the magic and doesn't want to use it, and then other characters who are just going with it right away. So how did that like take a while to figure out like how the system of magic would work in the book, or did you like model it off of other books at all, or?
I may be a little reactive in the sense that I love how people use magic in books. I love, and again, like any sort of fantastic element, magic exists as a kind of story. Like, we don't see it in the real world. At least we don't sort of all agree that we see it. But we hear it from stories in the same way that we hear ghost stories. And again, they exist as mostly just as stories. And so I love seeing how people put things together that are just stories, and how they reconfigure them. But I feel that often magic just defaults to having a lot of money. You know, that there's a lot of magic, which is you can have the things that you want without having to pay for them, or you can have power that the equivalent of flying first class, or like getting into a restaurant that you want to go to. But magic often begins to have kind of the feeling of money. And so I wanted to sit and think with that. I wanted to have that to an extent in the book, but I also wanted to allow for the possibility that nobody had magic because they were special, but simply because there is magic, and that once you have engaged with it in some way, then it's a question of I guess learning how to live with it. And I wanted to have one character who felt dubious about magic, as I think some people would. And I didn't want to write a story, and I didn't want a story in which, like the Campbell hero, he refuses the call to action, and then he hears it and acts. I really thought, why should he have to if he doesn't want to? You know, give him as much time as he wants to not use magic if he feels that magic is not for him.
Yeah, and there is kind of a dark side to the magic in the book. Like, one of the things I really loved and found so uncanny and creepy was like the ability to like create people using magic. That, I hope that's not too much of a spoiler, but like there's kind of, some of the characters have this option basically to like create someone who maybe has died, or just create them completely anew, right? And it seems like it's the person, but it's like once you know that they're not real, it kind of takes the charm away from it. And I thought that was a really interesting and human kind of dilemma of whether to just like live with the lie and like be happy with it, or reject it in favor of what's real.
I'm a real fan of doppelgangers of pretty much any stripe. That when it comes to the uncanny, that doppelgangers are super high up on my list, and in different kinds, identical doppelgangers, or else, you know, the idea of somebody who's just tied to you, who has a relationship to sort of whether good things or bad things happen to you. And so I knew going into it that, and this is I am a short story writer. If I was going to write a novel, I thought I have all this space. I'm going to throw in everything that I like. So I will, have doppelgangers, and I will, allow myself to put in a lot of love stories, and also to have a lot of music in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I noticed is there's a lot of animals in the book. And I wondered if that was something, if you're thinking about animal. I mean, a lot of times it's like a person is turned into an animal, but there are just so many great like animal stories within the book.
I think, when I was a kid, I loved Tolkien, I loved C.S. Lewis, but those were books that I loved because my parents read them to me. And I think one of the first really large fantasy books that I read that I picked out for myself was The Once and Future King. And I loved those. I loved the animal stories, the transformations in that book. And so I think I was probably drawing partly from that. But that is a huge book, with a lot of I guess, sections that feel like they have their own texture, but part of it is these stories of transformation and what it is like to be. And I am not handling it in the same way that he does, but I think I love what he does there, and I wanted to see what it would be like if I could do that kind of thing in my own book.
If you could transform into an animal, which one would it be?
I don't actually know.
Yeah.
I think because of the book, I will say a seagull.
Yeah.
Because seagulls are pains in the asses, but they seem like they have a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Not like a swarm of moths, which also happens.
It would be very tempting to be a swarm of moths. It's great, but the moth is actually my enemy.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. We have a lot of moth infestations, and I've really waged war on them. And if I were to turn into a cloud of moths, I think bad things would happen to me karmically because of the stuff I've done to moths.
Well, I guess I'm curious. Like, of course, this is your first novel. That's like the big kind of headline, right, for this book. And do you feel ambivalent about that at all after writing stories for so long, or does it feel like kind of entering a new mode, or?
Maybe. Honestly, I feel ambivalent about pretty much everything. So it's very difficult to untangle, like, is there a higher level of the ambivalence? And maybe, I kind of feel like at the moment, one, I feel a little surprised because, everybody loves novels, which is great. And I have never really... For a long time, I just did not want to write one. And then I wrote one, and I felt sort of dissatisfaction. I thought, do I really feel better having written a novel than I feel having written one short story? No. And then I felt strange because you send a novel out into the world, and it is all one thing. With a collection, you think, well, if somebody doesn't like that story, then maybe they'll like that. But you put a novel out, and they have to be on board with the tonal quality, with the texture, with the thing that you're doing. And that feels weird. I think, and maybe that does mean that I'm a cloud of moths, because that is much more like a collection. The novel is maybe more like a bear.
Totally.
But having said that, I couldn't ask for anything more in terms of... at the moment, ambivalent, very happy, a little freaked out, a lot of other things.
Yeah, for sure. No, I feel like the world is so excited to read Kelly Lank's first novel, but I imagine it wasn't your first novel though. Like, have there been other novel projects along the way, or?
No,
really?
but the next one, I do have another novel thing that I want to do that will be very, very different from this. And you have a novel coming next year.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this sounds familiar at all, the ambivalence or the...
Yeah, I just think it's interesting because like publishing prioritizes novels so much, and I'm not totally clear why short stories aren't more popular, because in a way it seems like it would be perfect for people's short attention spans, right? You can kind of like read one story and then put it down for forever if you want, or come back to it, later. So I don't really know, but I think maybe part of it is what you're saying about it's harder to cover like a story collection. It's harder to sum it all up in a review or in whatever press coverage. And yeah, there is just something about a novel that feels really like sticky.
Yeah.
People are really drawn to it.
Yeah.
So what's your next project?
A novel that will be as much like a short story as possible. I think it'll be a very short ghost story novel, because that length in ghost stories work really well. And I think at a short length, mood and tone and the obliqueness that really work for ghost stories. So I have an idea, I have a structure. So now I need to write it.
Maybe this is, we'll go to the Q&A in 1 second, but maybe this is a very nerdy like writer question, but do you feel like what's the difference between a short story and a novel? Like, is it just the length, or is there something more to it? Like, could there be a 200-page short story or a 30-page novel, for instance?
That is actually what I'm asking myself right now, because when I say I want to write a novel at short story length, but what I want is to write basically a short story that's about 50,000 words. It's technically speaking not a short story anymore, but maybe I could make it feel like a short story.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think we're going to turn to the Q&A now. So we'll open it up to everyone, and I'll repeat the questions into the mic so everyone can hear them. Yeah.
I have a question. So, of course, I've known you for a number of years. I'm very familiar with your work and absolutely love it, so I cannot wait to read this. One thing that I've always wanted to ask you, and we're always just too busy, it sounds so silly and woo-woo, do you have personal experience with supernatural and ghosts? I mean, I live in an 1884 Victorian here in the city. I would love for it to be haunted, but it's not. Unfortunately, I can blame things on the cats, but not ghosts. So I'm just wondering if you have ever kind of stepped into that liminal space yourself or had experiences. I mean, I'm sure what Massachusetts is rife with ghosts. So I'm just wondering.
I have a lot of friends from Massachusetts. Oh yeah, sorry. Yep.
So the question was just if she has personal experiences with ghosts.
I have a lot of friends in Massachusetts with ghost stories, and I have a lot of friends just with personal ghost stories. I am missing that gene. I do think that the ghost thing to me seems, and who knows what a ghost is? Like, is a ghost something that remains of a consciousness? Is it a recording? Is it some kind of projection? But I do know enough people who have seen weird stuff that I am prepared to believe that there's something that some people can see that other people can't. But like asparagus, I don't have either. I don't have the genes.
There's a piece in Get in Trouble that is a superhero / zombie / Wizard of Oz pastiche. And I see that sort of a multi-pastiche format in a few of your pieces. I was wondering, how do you know when disparate ideas are going to go together? Does it just feel like a natural thing, or is it something you have to think about a bit?
That's a great question, and I think that often when I first started writing, I would feel like I had a couple of ideas for short stories lined up, that I would think, oh, here's a story, and here's a story, and here's a story, because they were very, very different from each other. But when I began to write the first one, I would see ways that I could fold the second one in, and then the third one as well. And often it really was a combination of what I originally thought were 3 story ideas. And what I eventually told myself was that, a lot of stuff comes in 3s for whatever reason. I feel like the 3 things, it's a pattern in stories, but it also often seems to be a kind of signal in life. You hear a book mentioned 3 times, and then you go out and you look for it. And so it felt like maybe it was part of that it was the pattern of how we respond to things, but also the fact that they would arrive very close together. that if I sat with them, even if I was thinking mostly about the first, that these tendrils would start going out, and I would realize that there were many things that pushed the three ideas together. And so what I do now, I work differently now, but what I often do is if I have an idea that feels like it sits either at the heart or on the outskirts of a particular genre, then I start to think about what I like about that genre, what feels essential to that genre, what feels outside of it, but also I begin to think about connection points to other traditions or patterns of story to see what will, it's like throwing out a line to see what you catch on it. And I think that first habit where the things would arrive in threes ended up serving me really well. I don't have a great answer, but the thing that I do now, where once I have an idea, I start thinking about where I locate it in terms of how close it is to very sturdy genre patterns as opposed to more experimental patterns maybe, or that I start throwing stuff out, casting out from those intersection points. What are the other genre patterns that are adjacent to the one that I'm already thinking about? What are the kinds of characters who show up in those genres? What other kinds of stories do they fit into? And what happens if you throw them into something that does not feel like the place where they originally belong?
You mentioned, I guess, working on this novel was like a chance to play with elements perhaps that aren't conducive in a short story. You mentioned like multi-POV. Were there other elements you discovered while writing this that you felt like don't work in a short story context? Just curious what those might be.
That I'm not actually sure that it felt like I had the opportunity to make things much more dense, and that I was able to. I had to think more about structure of a plot. This is going to sound strange, but one of the things I thought a lot about was about the difference between novels and forms of serial storytelling, especially visual serial storytelling, comics, movies, and television, and about the things that those forms of storytelling can do that fiction can't. And one of the things that I love melodramas. I love especially supernatural melodramas. And one of the things that I think I envy in terms of writing fiction as opposed to working in those mediums is the ability of move the person who is watching from a scene that feels tense or tragic or very high stakes immediately into a mood that feels very comic with a different character, and that quality of very rapid tonal variation. And that's true of music as well. And so I was really interested. You can't do that in fiction to the same level, but by doing these the short chapters, the books, I was able to get a little closer to it than I would be in a short story where that is not feasible in the same way.
Yeah, and I feel like the short chapters do make, even though it's a long book, it makes it feel like kind of a quick read actually, because it is like, shifting and getting a new point of view. So I love that. Yeah.
So this is kind of a two-parter. So did you feel at all pressured by publishers, agents, whatever, to write a novel finally, or was it just a story idea that got too big?
I felt pressured by my friends. This is going to sound bad. All my friends are novelists. There are a lot of novelists out there. All the people that I work with write novels. Yes, publishers we started a press because at that point there were not so many publishers who were publishing collections, and there are a lot of short story writers that I loved, and there was a space to publish them. And when I signed on with my agent, we'd had a long conversation. I said, I'm a short story writer. I'm just gonna keep on doing this. And she said, that's totally fine. And then as soon as we signed, she sent me an email and she said, I understand and I accept the fact that you're a short story writer. And then I remember the language. However, it would be remiss of me not to say that I could definitely sell a novel. But fair, she never mentioned it again until the point where I said to her, I think I would like to try and sell a novel. But it was my friends. It was especially my friend Holly Black who said, if you do not write a novel on purpose, you will write one by accident. And I took that to heart. I really thought, now I think seems maybe interesting to write a novel by accident, but at the time what I thought is people who write novels by accident are even more miserable, I think, than people who write them on purpose. So I thought, well, maybe it's time. And I did have an idea. I thought, well, I could think about that. So
the second part of the question is, now that you've written a novel, do you have any concerns about being able to squeeze yourself back into a short story format?
I had serious concerns about that, which is why I kept on going back and writing short stories while I was writing the novel, in part as a kind of a check-in, like to take the temperature, can I still do this, or am I feverish when I try it? And it was an enormous relief. And I think that if I had been working on the novel and I'd tried to write a story and been like, oh no, I can't do it, then I probably would have stopped writing the novel.
Kelly, I haven't read this yet. I'm really looking forward to it. And I didn't realize that this touches on romance novels as a genre. So I read them obsessively when I was maybe 13, and never picked them up since. Could you talk about something that romance novels get right and wrong about love? Or was there something that, as you were writing this, you wanted to say about love that you feel they don't get to say?
I think I'm interested in all genres that have very strict rules about structure or about landing places, which romances have. When I teach, one of the things that I ask them to do at a certain point is say, if you're writing a Western, what are the things that actually absolutely have to be in it? If you write a romance novel, what are the things that have to be in it? And it's less than you would think, but a happy ending is pretty crucial. What is the thing that if you leave out or disrupt, that the reader will be angry and say, well, this is not a romance anymore? And honestly, I don't know that storytelling, individual genres or traditions of storytelling on their own, I think they all get stuff wrong. I think that the things that we love to read and the genres that stay sort of compact in terms of the rules that they set for the writer tell us a lot about what we want as readers, and about the things that give us pleasure, the things that give us comfort, the things that we read in order to disrupt either our lives or else our sense of the way that the world works. But I don't think any genre, including romance, gets everything right or everything wrong. But what I love is what it tells us about what we want and what we hope for, and the way that we like to arrange life in terms of a story. And so there have been points in my life where the things that romance does have been really important to me. And then there are times when, the genre of my heart is an entirely different genre. But what I do love about romance novels is I feel that they are generous. They're generous towards their readers, they're generous towards their characters, and they are about human relationships. And there is a formula to it, but honestly, there is a formula to most kinds of storytellings, and that's what I find interesting.
Okay, one more question, maybe in the back.
You've created so many like amazing worlds in your short stories, and in all the reading I've done of your work, I haven't seen sort of the same universe pop up again. So I'm just wondering if you've ever felt tempted to be like, I wonder what's going on back in the library. Maybe not a sequel, but something I've seen in the stuff that
That's a good question. You know, do I ever think about what's going on in the world of a story that I've already written? And yes and no. That they're very glancing thoughts. I don't think I bet something interesting is happening over there. But I am usually, I think, one, I'm a very reactive writer. I'm writing to move away from the last thing that I did. You know, stuff is always going to sort of carry over in terms of things that I'm thinking about. But I am thinking, I did that, and now what is something different that I can do? In part because, you know, the thing that I didn't realize when I started writing, especially short stories, is you learn how to do certain things well, at least you hope that you do, but if you do them in a short story, and then you do them again, the attention of the reader sort of falls away a little bit because they begin to recognize your patterns as a writer. And so I am often, and I think I also would begin to think, well, this feels stale. And so as a writer, you figure out how to do things, and then you have to give them up and move on to things that you know how to do less well and figure out how to do those. And then you give those up and you sort of figure out how to do something else. And I think that often when I'm writing a story, what I'm looking for is a kind of problem or a kind of thing that I don't understand yet about narrative, so that I can explore that.
All right, great. I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Great job.
And I will say, if you didn't get to ask a question, I don't know how many people are on Blue Sky, but I am on Blue Sky, and I'm always happy to be asked questions there. I live a very narrowed life right now in many ways, and so talking to people on Blue Sky is pleasurable.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Pardon me, please. Sorry. Can we give one more hand for Kelly? Thank you both so much. Kate, thank you for your questions and for preparing and being here with Kelly. Kelly, thank you for sharing this book with all of us.
Thank you for hosting,
Oh, of
and
course.
thank y'all for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Thank all of you. Thanks to all of you as well. I'm just here to let you know that we have books for purchase at the front register near where you came in. If you look for them at the back desk, they will not be here. They're at the front register. You can find them there. But we will have Kelly signing at the back desk where my colleague Brendan is here. And we'll show you where the sign line wraps around. If you have any other questions, let me know. And if not, we will see you next time. Thank you so much.